Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. There's a certain kind of rugged honesty in Ecclesiastes that makes it feel very grounded. It doesn't usually speak in polished religious language. It talks about life the way life actually feels sometimes. Work, exhaustion, loneliness, frustration, companionship, mortality. It pulls things down to street level. And here Solomon makes an observation that sounds simple at first, but gets more important the older you get. Two are better than one. Not because people are always easy. Scripture never pretends that. Relationships can be messy, frustrating, complicated, and sometimes painful. But even with all that being true, human beings were never really designed to carry life entirely alone. The verse first talks about labor. They have a good reward for their labor. In other words, there's strength in shared effort. Things become lighter when weight is distributed instead of isolated. You see that everywhere in ordinary life. A difficult task becomes manageable when somebody else shows up to help. A long conversation feels less overwhelming when someone's willing to sit through it with you. Even silence feels different when you're not carrying it by yourself. And then Solomon moves into the image of falling. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. That line hits differently because it assumes falling is inevitable at some point. It doesn't say if one of them somehow fails unexpectedly. It just assumes human weakness is part of the equation. That's important because a lot of people spend huge amounts of energy trying to appear like they never struggle. Everybody wants to look self-sufficient. Everybody wants to project stability all the time. But Ecclesiastes cuts through that performance pretty quickly. At some point, everybody stumbles somewhere. And the real question becomes, who's around when it happens? It's a bit like riding a bike on a long trail with another rider nearby. You might not need help most of the time. In fact, for long stretches, you're just moving independently, side by side, each carrying your own pace. But if something goes wrong, if the tire slips, if you lose balance, if something catches unexpectedly, suddenly the presence of another person matters a whole lot more than it did 30 seconds earlier. That's the kind of practical wisdom Solomon is getting at here. Companionship is not just about enjoyment, it's also about support when life becomes uneven. And notice the warning attached to the second half of the verse. Woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. That word woe carries grief in it, not condemnation, sadness. It recognizes how difficult isolation becomes when hardship enters the picture. Now, this doesn't mean every person needs constant crowds around them. Some people are naturally quieter, more reflective, more comfortable in solitude. There's nothing wrong with that. Even Yeshua himself withdrew alone regularly. But solitude and isolation are not the same thing. Solitude can be healthy. Isolation slowly convinces a person they must carry everything alone. And modern life pushes people toward that more than they realize. Everybody's connected constantly, yet many people have very few real relationships where honesty actually exists. Lots of surface interaction, very little actual lifting when somebody falls. That's why this verse matters so much for believers specifically, because Scripture consistently presents believers not as isolated individuals, but as people walking together, helping carry burdens, correcting each other gently, and encouraging one another, praying for one another. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And part of spiritual maturity is learning both sides of this passage, learning how to receive help and learning how to become the kind of person who helps lift others. A lot of people struggle with the first part. Pride gets involved, or fear, or embarrassment. People don't want to admit they're struggling because they think weakness makes them less valuable somehow. But Ecclesiastes assumes falling is part of being human, not proof of failure as a person. Sometimes strength actually looks like allowing trusted people to help carry weight for a while. Then there's the other side, becoming someone who notices when another person is struggling instead of walking past it. That doesn't always require dramatic solutions. Sometimes lifting someone up looks very ordinary. Checking in consistently. Listening without trying to fix everything immediately. Showing up when it would be easier not to. Giving encouragement when somebody's tired enough they can't generate much themselves. Most people underestimate how powerful simple presence can be. And honestly, some of the strongest friendships are built less through constant excitement and more through steady reliability. Just knowing somebody's there when the road gets rough. So the application here is pretty straightforward. First, don't isolate yourself unnecessarily. Independence can become a kind of armor if you're not careful. There's wisdom in allowing trustworthy people into your life enough that mutual support is actually possible. Second, pay attention to the people around you. Not everybody who's struggling announces it loudly. Some people fall quietly. Some people hide exhaustion behind routine and humor and productivity. And third, remember that biblical community is not about performance. It's about shared endurance, shared encouragement, shared faithfulness through imperfect lives. Because eventually, everybody hits stretches of road where balance gets harder to maintain. And when that happens, having somebody nearby who can help steady you becomes one of the quiet gifts God gives through other people. Well, thank you for joining me here today, my friends, my family, and anyone else who might be listening, riding along. Well, this one sure hit home, as these little devotions often do. See, the Ruach HaKodesh leads me in my study, and then I share here with you. And speaking of you listening to this right now, I want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your fellowship. Thank you for your company. Some days the only fellowship I get with fellow believers is right here online. And I sure do appreciate you being here, spending some time with this old man. I hope to see you here tomorrow. And until then, Abba willing, shalom, shalom.